Ambassador Thexnari walked through the human settlement on New Eden, her forearms clasped behind her back in the traditional pose of respectful observation. The Velkari had been studying humans for over 300 years, ever since first contact, and she still found them fascinating in their simplicity. The settlement looked more like a park than a city. Humans had built their homes between towering trees, with gardens flowing seamlessly from one property to another. Children played games that seemed to have no purpose other than fun. Adults sat in small groups, talking quietly or reading from handheld devices. Some painted pictures of the landscape. Others played musical instruments. "Ambassador, would you like some tea?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, the settlement's coordinator. She was a small woman with graying hair and gentle eyes that seemed to hold endless patience. "That would be pleasant, thank you," Thexnari replied, settling her large frame onto one of the specially designed chairs the humans had provided for visiting aliens. Dr. Chen returned with a steaming cup that smelled of flowers. "How are your observations going?" "Very well. Though I must admit, my government finds your people puzzling." Dr. Chen smiled. "Oh? How so?" Thexnari sipped her tea carefully. "In all our travels across the galaxy, we have never encountered a species quite like humans. Most civilizations develop along predictable paths. They build armies, establish territories, create weapons to defend themselves. But humans—" She gestured at the peaceful scene around them. "You seem to have skipped that entire phase of development. We've found other pursuits more rewarding," Dr. Chen said simply. This was exactly what confused the Velkari and other galactic species. Humans had the technology for space travel, advanced medicine, and sophisticated manufacturing, but they showed no interest in military power. Their planets had no weapons factories, no military academies, no warrior classes. Instead, they focused on art, music, literature, and what they called sports. Thexnari had spent considerable time trying to understand human sports. They seemed to involve arbitrary rules that made simple tasks unnecessarily difficult. Humans would hit small balls with sticks, chase inflated spheres around fields, or compete to see who could run fastest in circles. When she asked about the purpose, humans would say things like, "It's fun," or "It builds character." Even more puzzling were the activities humans called extreme sports. They would deliberately put themselves in dangerous situations, jumping from high places with fabric wings, sliding down mountains on thin boards, or climbing vertical rock faces with minimal equipment. When asked why, they would shrug and say they enjoyed the challenge. The Galactic Council had classified humans as Category 5 pacifists, the most peaceful designation possible. In 3 centuries, humans had never been involved in a single military conflict. When the Corvan Empire had begun expanding aggressively 5 years ago, absorbing smaller civilizations through conquest, the Council had asked every member species to contribute forces to contain the threat. Humans had politely declined. "We prefer diplomatic solutions," the human representative had said. "Perhaps we could help negotiate a peaceful resolution instead?" The Corvans had laughed at the suggestion. They were a warrior race that respected only strength. The idea of negotiating with what they saw as weak gardeners was absurd to them. Thexnari watched a group of human children playing a game that involved trying to hit each other with soft projectiles while avoiding being hit themselves. They laughed and shouted as they ran around obstacles, diving and rolling to avoid the harmless missiles. To her analytical mind, it looked almost like combat training, but she dismissed the thought. Humans didn't train for combat. "What do you do when faced with genuine threats?" she asked Dr. Chen. "What kind of threats?" "Hostile species, natural disasters, situations where violence might seem necessary." Dr. Chen considered the question thoughtfully. "We adapt. Humans are very good at finding creative solutions to problems. We've found that most conflicts arise from misunderstandings or resource disputes. Address the root causes, and the symptoms usually disappear." It was the same answer Thexnari had received dozens of times from different humans. They seemed genuinely to believe that all problems could be solved through understanding and cooperation. In her reports to the Council, She had noted this as either admirable naivety or profound wisdom. She wasn't sure which. As she walked back to her ship later that day, Thexnari passed a group of humans practicing something they called martial arts. They moved in fluid, precise patterns, their movements both beautiful and somehow unsettling. When she asked about it, they explained it as moving meditation, designed to promote physical and mental health. The instructor, an elderly man with scarred hands, demonstrated a technique that involved redirecting an opponent's force back against them. The strongest attack can become a weakness if properly understood, he said with a gentle smile. Thexnari found herself thinking about those words as her ship departed New Eden. Humans were certainly unusual. They had spread across dozens of worlds, established thriving colonies, and contributed remarkable innovations in medicine and technology. Their artists were welcomed throughout the galaxy. Their doctors were among the most skilled practitioners anywhere. Their engineers designed systems of elegant efficiency, but they remained pacifists in a galaxy where strength was often the only language that mattered. Other species protected them, not out of obligation, but because humans posed no threat to anyone. They were useful allies and harmless neighbors. In her final report, Thexnari wrote, "Humans continue to be the most peaceable species in known space. They show no military capabilities or aggressive tendencies. Their focus on cultural pursuits and philosophical development makes them valuable contributors to galactic civilization. Recommend continued diplomatic relations and cultural exchange." She sealed the report and transmitted it to the Velkari Council, along with samples of human art and music that would delight audiences back home. As her ship jumped to hyperspace, Thexnari looked forward to her next assignment. Studying humans was pleasant work, but she sometimes longed for more challenging subjects. Behind her, on New Eden, the humans continued their quiet lives among the gardens, playing their games and creating their art, while something vast and ancient stirred in the darkness between stars, moving toward the galaxy with hunger that could not be satisfied. The first reports came from the Outer Rim territories, so far from civilized space that most species ignored them completely. Mining stations going silent. Trade routes mysteriously abandoned. Survey teams finding empty solar systems where populated worlds should have been. Fleet Admiral Korath of the United Talon clans studied the data with growing unease. His kind had evolved from predatory birds, and his instincts screamed that something was hunting in the dark between stars. The Talons controlled the galaxy's most powerful military force, but even they couldn't investigate every remote outpost that went offline. That changed when the research station at Kepler 442 transmitted its final message. "Unknown vessels approaching the system, Dr. HFY had reported, her voice steady despite the terror in her compound eyes. "Ships of massive size, approximately 12 kilometers in length. Design is biological in nature. They appear to be feeding on the asteroid belt." The transmission showed creatures that defied classification. They looked like vast insects crossed with starships, their hulls pulsing with organic rhythms. Smaller organisms swarmed around them like antibodies, consuming everything in their path. As the Talons watched in horror, the creatures turned toward Kepler 442's inhabited moon. "They're not just attacking the colony, Dr. HFY whispered. "They're eating it, consuming the entire surface. The matter is being processed into, by the ancestors, they're building more ships." The transmission ended in static. Admiral Korath immediately dispatched a battle fleet to investigate. The Talon ships were among the most advanced in the galaxy, equipped with plasma cannons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached in 200 years of warfare. Surely whatever had attacked a defenseless research station would flee when faced with real military power. The fleet found Kepler 442 completely stripped of matter. Where a thriving moon had orbited a gas giant, only empty space remained. Even the orbital infrastructure was gone, consumed down to the last atom. "Fleet Admiral," reported Captain Scrixtai from the flagship. "Detecting movement in the asteroid field. Multiple contacts, very large." The Devourer fleet emerged from behind the gas giant like a nightmare made real. 27 ships, each the size of a small city, their surfaces crawling with smaller organisms. As the Talons watched, Several of the creatures began to change shape, growing new appendages that looked disturbingly like weapon systems. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Talon fleet threw everything they had at the creatures: plasma bursts that could melt starship armor, kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, quantum torpedoes that destabilized matter at the subatomic level. They scored hits, tearing chunks from the organic hulls, but the damage began healing almost immediately. Worse, the creatures seemed to learn from each attack. Weapons that had been effective in the first hour became useless as the enemy adapted. When Captain Scrick's tie tried the same plasma burst that had damaged an enemy ship earlier, the target simply absorbed the energy and used it to grow larger. "They're not just healing," the Admiral's tactical officer reported. "They're improving. Each ship is incorporating the damage patterns into stronger defenses." The Talons lost 12 ships before Admiral Korath ordered a retreat. As his damaged fleet limped home, he watched the Devourers consume the wreckage, growing visibly larger as they processed the advanced alloys and weapon systems. News of the defeat spread quickly. The Corvan War Empire, still engaged in their expansion campaign, initially dismissed the reports as Talon propaganda. But when 3 Corvan border worlds went silent in a single week, Emperor Vriexlon assembled the largest military force in galactic history. 200,000 ships from dozens of species converged on the Devourer's projected path. The crystalline hegemony contributed their reality-warping technologies. The Velkari deployed their most advanced energy weapons. Even the usually neutral synthetic collective offered their assistance, sending fleets of AI-controlled dreadnoughts. The Battle of the Nexus sector became the largest military engagement in recorded history. For 3 days, the combined fleets of the galaxy fought against creatures that seemed to exist outside conventional understanding. The Devourers had grown. Where 27 ships had destroyed the Talon fleet, now hundreds of organisms swarmed through space. Each one adapted to counter the weapons that had previously harmed them. The Allied fleet threw every weapon system ever devised at the enemy. Antimatter bombs that should have vaporized entire ships were absorbed and converted into more organic mass. Weapons that manipulated time and space themselves seemed to have no effect. When the synthetic collective deployed their most advanced AI-guided missiles, the Devourers simply incorporated the artificial intelligences into their own collective consciousness. On the second day, the creatures began to evolve in real time. Ships that had been damaged by crystalline reality warpers developed organs that could bend space around themselves. Organisms attacked by Corvan plasma cannons grew reflective chitin that turned the weapons against their users. By the third day, several Devourer ships had incorporated Alliance technology so completely that they fired captured weapons back at their former owners. The retreat became a rout. The greatest military force ever assembled fled in disorder, leaving behind nearly half their ships. The Devourers consumed everything: hulls, weapons, crew, and cargo, growing stronger with every victory. Emperor Vrexlon himself barely escaped when his flagship was overrun by creatures that had somehow learned to survive in the vacuum of space. His final transmission before fleeing was simple: "Conventional warfare is hopeless. These things don't fight like anything we understand. They adapt faster than we can develop new tactics. We need something else." The survivors limped back to the core worlds with news that shattered galactic civilization. The Devourers weren't just another hostile species. They were an evolutionary weapon that became stronger with every battle. Military experts estimated that the enemy fleet had grown by 300% during the engagement, incorporating not just Alliance technology, but Alliance tactical knowledge. In the aftermath, panicked governments began evacuating outer colonies. Refugee fleets crowded inter-system space stations. The stock markets of a dozen civilizations crashed as investors realized that all the military hardware in the galaxy couldn't stop what was coming. Admiral Korath, his career destroyed and his people facing extinction, stared at tactical displays showing the Devourers' projected path toward the core worlds. They would reach the major population centers in less than 6 months. The greatest military minds of 1,000 species had thrown everything they had at this enemy and failed completely. In desperation, he began reaching out to every species, every faction, every group that might have something, anything, that could help. Even the pacifists. Even the humans, though he couldn't imagine what a species without weapons could possibly contribute to stopping the apocalypse that was coming. The emergency session of the Galactic Military Council took place on Centauri Station, deep in the core territories. Representatives from every major military power sat around the massive circular table, their faces showing the strain of impending doom. Outside the station's viewports, refugee ships stretched to the horizon. Millions of beings fleeing the advancing Devourer fleet. Fleet Admiral Korath stood before the assembled leaders, his feathers dulled with exhaustion. "The situation is clear," he said, his voice hoarse from weeks of constant briefings. "Our combined forces have failed. Traditional military strategy has proven useless against an enemy that adapts faster than we can develop new tactics." General Vraxhai of the Korvan War Empire slammed a massive fist on the table. "Impossible. There must be some weapon. Some strategy we haven't tried." "What would you suggest, General?" Admiral Korath's tone was bitter. "We've deployed every weapon system in our arsenals. Antimatter, quantum destabilizers, reality warping technologies, temporal displacement devices. Nothing works. The creatures absorb our attacks and use them to become stronger." Commander Zixlat of the Crystalline Hegemony spoke in harmonious tones that couldn't hide her despair. "Our scientists estimate the Devourer fleet has tripled in size since the Nexus sector engagement. At current growth rates, they will be unstoppable by the time they reach the core worlds." The council fell into grim silence. Through the viewports, they could see construction ships desperately trying to evacuate entire populations. Some worlds were attempting to hide their civilizations underground or in deep space. Others were broadcasting surrender messages, hoping the Devourers might show mercy to those who didn't resist. "Perhaps," suggested Director Catherine of the Synthetic Collective, "we should consider unconventional approaches. We have exhausted military solutions. What about diplomatic contact?" General Vraxhai snorted. "Diplomacy with creatures that consume everything they encounter? They don't communicate, they devour. Then what about biological warfare? Chemical weapons? Something they can't adapt to?" "We tried that," Admiral Korath replied. "The creatures processed the toxins and became immune within hours. Some of them actually seemed to benefit from the exposure." Chairman Yilvex of the Council leaned forward. "Then we need fresh perspectives. Ideas from outside traditional military thinking. Are there any resources we haven't considered?" Ambassador Thexnari, who had been quietly listening from the observers section, raised one of her forearms. "If I may suggest something." "Chairman." "Speak, Ambassador." "There are species we haven't consulted, non-military civilizations that might offer different viewpoints." The military leaders exchanged skeptical glances. "Such as?" Admiral Korath asked. Thexnari hesitated. "The humans." The silence that followed was broken by General Vraxhai's harsh laughter. "Humans? The gardeners? What could a species without weapons possibly contribute to stopping the Devourers?" "I don't know," Thexnari admitted. "But they have a saying. Desperate times call for desperate measures. We have tried every conventional approach. Perhaps we need an unconventional one." Commander Zixlat's crystalline form chimed thoughtfully. "The ambassador has a point. Humans have made remarkable contributions to medical science and engineering. Their approaches are often unusual." "Unusual isn't going to stop creatures that eat starships," General Vraxhai grumbled. Chairman Yilvex studied the holographic displays, showing the Devourers' advance. "At this point, we have nothing to lose. Admiral Korath, I'm authorizing you to make contact with every non-military species. Request any assistance they can provide. Evacuation ships, medical support, scientific expertise, anything." Admiral Korath nodded grimly. "I'll contact them all personally, though I suspect most will have little to offer beyond humanitarian aid." 3 days later, Admiral Korath's ship approached Earth's orbital installations. He had visited 17 species so far, receiving offers of medical supplies, transport vessels, and scientific consultation, all helpful for managing refugees, but nothing that could stop the Devourers. The human orbital facilities looked exactly as he expected. Clean, efficient, and completely non-threatening. No weapons platforms, no military vessels, just civilian traffic, and what appeared to be research stations. His escort consisted of 3 small human ships that looked more like luxury yachts than anything military. Admiral Korath, came a pleasant voice over the communication system. This is Captain Martinez of the Earth Defense Coordination Office. We're honored by your visit. President Chen is waiting to meet with you. The Earth Defense Coordination Office turned out to be a modest building overlooking a lake, surrounded by gardens and walking paths. President Chen was a small, elderly woman who greeted him with the typical human warmth that always surprised alien visitors. Admiral, welcome to Earth. I'm deeply sorry about the losses your people have suffered. This devourer threat sounds absolutely horrific. They sat in a comfortable room with large windows showing the peaceful landscape outside. President Chen served tea from a delicate ceramic set, as if they were discussing art rather than galactic extinction. Madam President, Admiral Korath began carefully, I must be honest. I'm not sure what assistance humanity can provide in this crisis. Your people are known for your peaceful nature, your medical expertise, your artistic contributions. But we face a military threat, unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. President Chen nodded sympathetically. Of course, Admiral. We understand the gravity of the situation. We've been monitoring the reports, and our hearts go out to all the species affected. We're seeking any assistance you can provide. Evacuation ships, medical support, perhaps scientific consultation on the creature's biology. Certainly. We can provide medical teams and transport vessels immediately. President Chen sipped her tea thoughtfully. But Admiral, may I ask, what exactly are you requesting from us? Admiral Korath found himself fumbling for words. How do you ask a pacifist species to help fight a war? Madam President, I know this goes against your people's nature, but would humanity consider joining the fight? The question hung in the air like a live explosive. President Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. She set down her teacup with careful precision and looked out the window for a long moment. Joining the fight, she repeated quietly. I understand it's not in your nature, Admiral Korath said quickly. But we're facing extinction. Every species in the galaxy is at risk. If there's anything at all that humanity might contribute. President Chen turned back to him, and he was surprised by the intensity in her gaze. Admiral, that's a very serious request. Before I can answer, I need to consult with my colleagues. She reached for a small communication device. Defense Minister Harrison, could you join us, please? And activate the protocols. The last phrase was spoken so quietly Admiral Korath almost missed it. But something about the way President Chen said it sent an unexpected chill down his spine. Defense Minister Harrison arrived within minutes, but Admiral Korath immediately noticed something different about the man. While President Chen projected the typical human warmth and gentleness, Harrison moved with a fluid precision that reminded the Admiral of his own elite warriors. The minister's security detail followed him into the room, and their movements made Korath's predatory instincts suddenly alert. These humans moved like soldiers. Not just any soldiers, like veterans who had seen real combat. Admiral Korath, Harrison said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. I understand you've asked us to join the fight against the Devourers. Minister Harrison, I realize this is unusual. Your people are known for your peaceful nature. Yes, we are. Harrison's smile was polite, but didn't reach his eyes. Admiral, before we discuss military cooperation, I need to ask you a direct question. Are you prepared to see humans as we actually are? The question puzzled Admiral Korath. I'm not sure I understand. You've observed our species for 3 centuries, President Chen said, her tone still pleasant, but somehow more serious. You've seen our art, our medicine, our philosophy. You've classified us as peaceful gardeners, but Admiral, Has it never occurred to you to wonder how a species survives long enough to develop interstellar travel without developing the ability to defend itself? Before Admiral Korath could respond, the walls of the conference room began to move. What he had assumed were decorative panels slid smoothly aside, revealing thick, transparent barriers that looked out into vast underground complexes. Admiral Korath stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. Stretching out before him was a manufacturing facility that dwarfed anything he had ever seen. The scale was impossible. Kilometers of advanced production lines that seemed to descend deep into the planet's crust. Machines assembled components using technologies he didn't recognize. Workers moved between stations with the same fluid precision he had noticed in the minister's security detail. But it was the products being manufactured that made his blood run cold. Weapons, ships, technologies that looked decades ahead of anything in the galactic military arsenal. "This is the Hamilton Defense Complex," Minister Harrison said casually. "One of our smaller facilities." "Smaller?" Admiral Korath's voice came out as barely a whisper. President Chen touched another control, and new viewports opened. Training facilities where humans practiced combat techniques that blended physical prowess with technological integration. Command centers where three-dimensional displays showed detailed models of every known galactic military system. Laboratories where scientists worked on projects that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "Admiral," President Chen said gently, "do you really think a species could develop interstellar travel, spread across dozens of worlds, and thrive in a galaxy full of warrior races without learning how to protect itself? But your planets have no military installations, no weapons factories. We've observed you for centuries." Minister Harrison laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "What exactly did you observe, Admiral? Humans pursuing artistic endeavors? Playing sports? Practicing meditation?" "Yes, our artistic endeavors include detailed studies of every known species' psychology, social structure, and cultural weaknesses. Our sports are combat training disguised as entertainment. Our meditation gardens contain some of the most sophisticated command and control systems ever built." Admiral Korath felt his world shifting beneath him. The extreme sports, combat conditioning, teaching our people to function under extreme stress, to adapt quickly to changing conditions, to survive in hostile environments. Minister Harrison's expression was patient, as if explaining something obvious to a child. The cultural exchanges, intelligence gathering. We've had observers embedded in every major military organization in the galaxy for the past 2 centuries. We know more about your tactical doctrines than your own generals do. President Chen activated another display, this one showing star charts with markers throughout known space. "Admiral, did you really think we built colonies on dozens of worlds just for the scenery? Every human settlement is positioned at a strategic location. Every research station can be converted to a military base within hours." The scope of what he was seeing began to overwhelm Admiral Korath's analytical mind. "How long have you been preparing for war?" "We've been preparing for this war since the day we met the Velkari," Minister Harrison said. 300 years ago, we realized that appearing weak was our best defense in a galaxy full of predatory species. So we gave you exactly what you expected to see. Peaceful, harmless gardeners who posed no threat to anyone. But the Corvan expansion. We declined to intervene militarily because the Corvans weren't a real threat. They're brutal but predictable. Traditional galactic powers could have contained them if they had worked together instead of protecting their individual territories. President Chen's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. The Devourers, however, represent something different. A new display activated, showing detailed analysis of the Devourer fleet's composition, tactics, and adaptive capabilities. The level of detail was staggering, far more comprehensive than anything the galactic military had assembled. "We've been monitoring the Devourers since their first appearance," Minister Harrison explained. "Our analysis indicates they're not a natural species. They're a biological weapon system, probably designed by an extinct civilization as a last resort against some ancient enemy." "How could you possibly know that?" Admiral Korath demanded. "Because we've encountered similar concepts in our own research." The minister's smile was cold. "Admiral, You asked us to join the fight. The truth is, we've been fighting this war since the moment the Devourers appeared. Not with fleets and weapons, but with intelligence gathering and strategic preparation. President Chen stood and walked to the viewport overlooking the manufacturing complex. Your conventional forces failed because you tried to fight the Devourers on their terms, biological adaptation, and overwhelming consumption. But every biological system has weaknesses. Every adaptation creates vulnerabilities. We've spent the last 6 months developing countermeasures, Minister Harrison continued. Not weapons designed to overpower the enemy, but systems designed to exploit the flaws in their evolutionary mechanisms. Admiral Korath stared at the humans with a mixture of awe and terror. You've been planning to fight them, Admiral, President Chen said, turning back to him with that same gentle smile that now seemed infinitely more dangerous. We've been planning to fight everyone. The question is whether you want us to fight for you, or whether you'd prefer to discover what happens when humanity chooses to fight against you. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the vast manufacturing complex below. Admiral Korath realized that in asking humanity to join the fight, he had awakened something that had been patiently watching and waiting for 3 centuries. What do you need from us? He asked finally. Nothing, Minister Harrison replied. We've been ready for this war longer than you've been preparing to lose it. The only question is whether you're ready to see what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be something we're not. The human defense fleet emerged from hidden bases throughout the outer rim like ghosts materializing from the void. Admiral Korath watched the deployment from the command center on New Geneva Station, still struggling to process what he was witnessing. These weren't the massive dreadnoughts that galactic civilizations used to project power. Human warships were smaller, sleeker, built for speed and stealth rather than raw firepower. They moved through space with an organic fluidity that reminded him uncomfortably of the Devourers themselves. Fleet deployment is complete, reported Commander Sarah Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter and apparently one of humanity's top military strategists. 47 hunter groups are in position along the Devourer approach vectors. Only 47 ships? Admiral Korath couldn't hide his dismay. The enemy fleet numbers? In the thousands now. Commander Chen smiled with the same patient expression her mother had shown. Admiral, we're not planning to match them ship for ship. We're going to poison them. The Devourer fleet had grown massively since the Battle of Nexus Sector. Intelligence reports suggested over 3,000 individual organisms, each one adapted from the wreckage of defeated galactic forces. They moved through space like a living cancer, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with each meal. Contact in 3 hours, reported the tactical officer. The lead elements are approaching the Kepler system. Commander Chen activated the fleet-wide communications array. All hunter groups, this is command. Execute Operation Serpent's Tooth on my mark. Admiral Korath watched as the human ships moved to intercept, but their approach was unlike anything he had seen before. Instead of forming battle lines or defensive formations, they scattered into the void, disappearing from conventional sensors entirely. Where did they go? He demanded. Stealth systems, Commander Chen replied casually. We've been developing them for quite some time. The Devourers hunt by detecting conventional energy signatures and mass concentrations. Our ships don't show up on their biological sensors. The first engagement began an hour later, but it took Admiral Korath several minutes to realize a battle was even happening. There were no massive energy discharges. No spectacular explosions, just tiny flashes of light in the darkness, so brief they might have been sensor glitches. Hunter Group 7 has made contact, reported the communications officer. Payload delivered successfully. What payload? Admiral Korath asked. I don't see any weapons fire. Watch, Commander Chen said, pointing to the main display. One of the Devourer organisms, a massive creature the size of a battleship, suddenly began to convulse. Its surface, which had been pulsing with organic rhythms, started to ripple chaotically. Smaller organisms swarming around it began to attack their parent ship instead of protecting it. What did you do to it? Nanoscale agents designed to corrupt their adaptation mechanisms, Commander Chen explained. The Devourer's greatest strength is their ability to evolve in response to threats. But evolution requires accurate information processing. We've introduced errors into that process. As Admiral Korath watched, the infected organism began to grow new appendages that served no function. Its biological systems started producing chemicals that were toxic to its own tissues. Most importantly, it began broadcasting corrupted adaptation data to other ships in the fleet. It's spreading, he breathed. That's the point. The Devourers share genetic information through quantum entanglement networks. Every ship that receives corrupted data becomes confused, starts adapting incorrectly. Their strength becomes their weakness. More human ships struck throughout the enemy fleet, each one delivering its payload and vanishing before the Devourers could respond. The infected organisms began to exhibit increasingly bizarre behavior. Some tried to consume their own hulls. Others grew weapons that fired at random targets, including their neighbors. But the most devastating effect was on their adaptation capabilities. When the remaining healthy Devourers tried to respond to human attacks, they incorporated the corrupted data and began evolving in counterproductive directions. Hunter Group 12. Target the cluster organisms in Sector 7. Commander Chen ordered. Intelligence suggests they're trying to purge the contamination. Understood, Command. Going silent. Admiral Korath finally understood what he was witnessing. You're not fighting them. You're turning them against themselves. Biological warfare at the cellular level, Commander Chen confirmed. We studied their adaptation mechanisms for months, identified the critical vulnerabilities. The Devourers are incredibly sophisticated, but they're still biological systems, and biological systems can be hacked. The battle, if it could be called that, continued for 6 hours. Human ships appeared from nowhere, delivered their payloads, and vanished before the confused Devourers could mount effective responses. With each attack, more enemy organisms became infected with corrupted evolutionary data. By the 8th hour, the Devourer fleet was in complete chaos. Ships that had once moved with coordinated precision now fired on each other or attempted to consume their allies. Their hive mind communication network had become a liability, spreading the contamination faster than they could contain it. Final phase, Commander Chen announced. All hunter groups, implement the kill protocol. The human ships emerged from stealth for the first time since the battle began, but they weren't attacking the enemy. Instead, they broadcast a specific frequency that Admiral Korath's sensors couldn't identify. What is that signal? The termination command. Every nanoscale agent we've deployed has been programmed to respond to this frequency. They're now instructing the Devourer organisms to begin complete biological shutdown. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The massive enemy ships began to collapse in on themselves as their biological systems shut down in sequence. What had once been a fleet of world-eating monsters became a field of drifting organic debris. Status report, Commander Chen requested. Total enemy fleet neutralized, came the response. No human casualties. Minimal ammunition expended. Admiral Korath stared at the tactical display, showing the remains of what had been the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever faced. How long have you been planning this? The specific countermeasures? About 8 months. The underlying strategy? We've been developing biological warfare techniques since we first encountered the Velkari. Every species we've met has been cataloged, analyzed, and targeted. The implications hit Admiral Korath like a physical blow. You could do this to any of us. Commander Chen's expression didn't change. Yes, the peaceful settlements, the cultural exchanges, the medical assistance, intelligence gathering, genetic sampling, social analysis. She turned to face him directly. Admiral, did you really think we would spread across the galaxy without understanding exactly who and what we were sharing it with? Through the viewport, Admiral Korath could see human ships moving through the debris field, ensuring that no Devourer organisms had survived the contamination. Their efficiency was absolute. Their methodology terrifying in its precision. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now we go back to our gardens, Commander Chen replied. We return to our art, and our philosophy, and our seemingly pointless games, and the galaxy continues to see us as harmless pacifists who happen to get lucky against an impossible enemy. But you're not pacifists. No, Admiral. We're apex predators, who learned that the most effective camouflage is the appearance of weakness. We've spent 3 centuries studying every species in known space, learning their strengths, cataloging their vulnerabilities, and preparing for the day we might need to defend ourselves. She gestured to the tactical display where human ships were already disappearing back into stealth. The Devourers were just the first threat that required us to show our true capabilities. There will be others, and when they come, they'll face the same choice every potential enemy faces: learn to coexist peacefully with humanity, or discover what happens when we stop pretending to be gardeners. Admiral Korath realized that the galaxy had just witnessed something far more significant than the defeat of the Devourers. They had seen the emergence of a species that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries, watching, learning, and preparing. As the human fleet vanished back into the void, returning to their secret bases and hidden installations, Admiral Korath understood that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. Humanity wasn't just another peaceful species to be protected. They were the apex predators who had been patiently waiting for someone to give them a reason to hunt.